From literally day one of the war in Ukraine, I have been saying on this channel that there is a very real risk of nuclear escalation, a very real risk of World War III. And now look where we are. We're in a situation where the West has provided progressively more advanced, more dangerous, more devastating weapon systems to Ukraine, where we're now at the point where they're providing battle tanks. So we've gone from not wanting to provide javelins, HIMARS, Patriots, Bradleys, tanks. We've gone through all of these different stages over the past few months. Each one of these systems in the end has been provided. So the question is, when does this end? What will the West not send to Ukraine? And of course, we all know where that escalatory spiral does end. It ends with a nuclear war. I'm Stuart Hooper, a lecturer in political science and PhD researcher. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'm aiming for 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Please help me get there and support a channel that is not concerned with either of the big political parties, not concerned with political ideologies, but real power structures, real institutional forces that shape our world. Now, let's think about what it means for the West to be funneling in main battle tanks into the war in Ukraine. Also, an important side note for those of you that are new. You're looking at someone who has been against the war in Iraq, against the war in Afghanistan, against the intervention in Syria, against the intervention in Libya. Someone that generally thinks the use of military force to achieve a political objective is wrong. So I've taken a position not only against those Western-started wars, but also this Russian-started war, with Putin really doing his best impression of George W. Bush with the war in Iraq. Now, beyond the obvious framing that we are seeing on this issue, which is, well, we want to help Ukraine win the war, we want to help the Ukrainians fight back against the Russians, defeat them, kick them out. Well, that's all well and good. But what else is going on here? What else is going on behind the scenes? Are there any ulterior motives that could potentially be playing out with this deployment of tanks to Ukraine? Absolutely. And there are quite a few of them, actually. The first one, which I think is rather interesting, is you can bet your bottom dollar that there are people within the Pentagon right now that see this as an experiment, a test of the Abrams tank as a weapon system versus a near-peer rival, Russia, meaning a country that has a similar technological capability when it comes to fighting wars. Now, of course, does the Pentagon test these tanks, test these weapon systems, run war games, all of this sort of stuff? Absolutely. But does that compare to a real world test of your tank versus the Russian military in a real combat zone? Absolutely not. This is a dream to weapons designers, weapons manufacturers, people that are interested in the continuation of American military power. This is their dream come true. They can finally see, would this tank really stand up in a real-world battlefield against the Russians? And there's also something else that's really closely tied to that, which is an somewhat underlying ulterior motive. I think with all of these gradual escalations with these weapon systems, slowly but surely over time growing in capabilities that have been provided to the Ukrainians, this is the West testing the Russian response. Now, again, on the surface, are they trying to help them win? Yes. But they're also testing what Russia is doing. They are poking the bear, so to speak. What happens if we deploy this? What are the Russians going to do? Are they going to have an uptick in missile strikes versus certain locations? Are they going to deploy certain forces, different types of units to different places? How are they going to respond to if we put this there, they're going to put this here, and so on and so forth around the battlefield? They're trying to see what the Russians are doing. They're trying to get a better understanding of how the Russians conduct a war. Again, there are grander motives that are playing out here. The danger of that one, of course, is, well, keep prodding the bear. Keep prodding, keep prodding. Maybe you don't get much response for a while. Maybe you don't get much response for 11 months. Maybe at some point they decide they're going to turn around and swipe back with a nuclear strike. That is a very real risk. And with each deployment of these growing technological capabilities, you can bet that risk is growing. What else is going on here, though? Behind the scenes, something that I talk about on this channel all the time, the military-industrial complex. There are interests within the Western world that literally want conflict to continue on this planet for as long as possible. They are financially interested in the continuation of violence. And of course, we're talking about the weapons manufacturers, or as they have been called more pejoratively, the merchants of death. These people do not want a quick solution to the war in Ukraine. And you can bet they absolutely want more and more systems sent over there so that the Western governments will continue to order more and more and more of these pieces of equipment to refill the stockpiles that they are now shipping out to Ukraine. And that's all, of course, not even touching on, yes, this is your money that has been spent for these weapons, which are now being funneled overseas to a foreign war. Meanwhile, you can't afford to buy a box of eggs. Again, I think if you rolled the clock back and you didn't have this war on terror, where trillions of dollars were wasted on literally nothing, just look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq today. Was anything achieved there? No. If you remove that didn't happen, just pretend that didn't happen. I think the Western world would be far happier to step in and support Ukraine in this situation. Far happier to give them all the money they wanted, all the equipment that they wanted. But you have a large contingent of people, myself included, in the Western world that look at these sorts of situations from a very critical perspective because of the disaster that was the war on terror. A couple of other points here which I think are interesting and worth mentioning as well. When it comes to the Abrams in particular, this is such a complex tank that it's bordering on ridiculous. The thing literally uses jet engines and jet fuel to move itself around a battlefield, and even then, it only reaches just over 40 miles an hour because it's so heavy. It has so much stuff squeezed into this small metal box that it needs jet engines to move the things around a battlefield. It is ridiculously complex. It's what you would really call Baroque technology. Way more complex than it needs to be. And what have we just proven with this? Well, for all of the millions, probably billions, of dollars that have been funneled into the Abrams tank over the years by the American government, making it more and more and more complex, well, when you're in a situation like this, it makes it really hard to send that sort of thing to somewhere that needs it. If this was a simpler tank, a simpler thing to operate, didn't require jet fuel to move, and that's not a meme, that's a fact about this thing, then it would actually be easier to help countries out when things like this happened. But we have this big military-industrial complex, wants all the money in the world to make all these complex changes and minor additions, and we can make it slightly better and do this and do that. In the grand scheme of things, you've just made a giant mess that now you can't get to where it actually needs to be to solve a real crisis. This is just one central issue when it comes to the military-industrial complex. Other points, two final points worth mentioning here. This is $6.2 million per tank. And they're sending 31 of them. So you're thinking just under $200 million of American taxpayers' money shipped off to Ukraine in the form of these tanks. Did anybody vote for this? Was anybody consulted on this? Absolutely not. This is the central theme of this channel. You cannot expect people to trust the government and just accept this is a democracy, my vote counts. When people are not consulted on any decision of major impact in the world or in their own countries. This goes above and beyond the average everyday man on the street, to the extent that they have no say on it whatsoever. And the final point, as I mentioned, yes, Russia has struggled in this conflict. Yes, Russia has had some rather inept responses to what the West has done. That doesn't guarantee that that situation is going to continue. I think the West would like to know, or like to think that it knows, what Russia's going to do next with this supposed spring offensive that's coming. But it's not guaranteed that we do know. It's not guaranteed that there will not be a low-yield nuclear strike in Ukraine. They have the big red button. The question for the Western world is, how far do you really want to push this nuclear taboo? The idea that nuclear weapons are just so bad, so evil, so hated within world politics that nobody would ever use them because of the really detrimental political effects that it would have on that country. Yes, that nuclear taboo has lasted rather well since the end of World War II. That doesn't mean it's going to last forever. We may be pushing our luck with this. Where is the international effort for peace? Where is the international coalition of countries that are pushing the Ukrainians and the Russians to come to the table, to talk, to negotiate, and to figure out a solution to this peacefully? I don't see it. This is the world we live in, you guys. For those of you who made it to the end of this video, I don't see this conflict getting resolved anytime soon. This is going to be the next Iraq, the next Afghanistan. This is going to drag on for years. If we allow it to, that is. So again, like I've mentioned before, pick up the phone, pick up your laptop, pick up whatever it is that you use to communicate with the wider world. Contact your elected officials. Try to start making them work for you once again. It's worth a shot, and it's probably the only shot that we have at this point. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back with more on Ukraine in the coming days.